The people we are fighting today, we funded. We stopped dealing with the Pakistani military.
Pak-US relations date back to October 1947. USA remains one of the first countries to have established diplomatic ties with Pakistan. It was the early days of cold rift between the Soviets and the US, and Pakistan had an option to click one of them, and Pakistan went with the US.
I think being closer to the United States was the main reason for that, was that the Americans were having democratic credentials. The political elite in this country, like Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Sir Zafrullah Khan and Liaquat Ali Khan, they all studied in England, and England were having democratic credentials. So that was the main reason we got closer to the United States.
I would suggest that this relationship should not be seen in isolation. From the history of Pakistan-US relations over the past many decades, A. B. Pakistan's own relations with the countries of the region, and C. the US interests in this part of the world. Now, if you agree that these three conditions should be kept in mind, then I would say that Pakistan-US relations are following a pattern that one has observed over the past many decades.
From the early days, US used Pakistan for her own interests in the region. Pakistan too was desperate for economic and military aid. This relationship is often deemed as a bumpy ride. It's alleged that when Premier Liaquat Ali Khan visited US, he was requested by US President Harry Truman for permission to formulate a CIA base in Pakistan to keep an eye on Soviets, which was not granted by Khan. After him, Pakistan kept on taking financial aid from US for its cooperation in Cold War.
Our relationship with the US in the Cold War was primarily on the Pakistani side formulated by military dictators, and therefore military dictators needed outside support to stay in power, so they continued this relationship with the US. But from day one, I'm talking about from the 1950s, when we went into CENTO and CETO, despite us having no animosity with China, for example, the relationship was out of balance. The costs and benefits, if you do a cost-benefit analysis, the costs were far greater than the benefits.
Pakistan not only signed mutual defense assistance agreement with the US for training of soldiers, but also leased out Peshawar Air Base to US on President Eisenhower's request.
Prime Minister Hossain Sohrawardy's days, we provided Badab Air Base on 10 years lease to the United States of America, and the U-2 incident that you are talking about. Badab Air became a very important listening post of CIA, and from there they used to monitor the communications and then the developments in the, at that time, USSR. So from that point of view, it was very important. And then the famous U-2 flight, one of the flight, it flew. Initially, when they demanded this thing, you may be knowing, Hossain Shahid Sohrawardy refused the American pilots flying this aircraft, because this is, then we are, if the aircraft is shot down or for technical reason it lands in USSR, then we'll run into trouble. So the first two flights were flown by the British pilots, and the next two missions were flown by the Americans. And this, when on 28th of April, one of the mission was flown, it was detected by the USSR, and they tried to shoot it down, but because of very high altitude, this plane survived, and it landed in Zahdan, Iran. The next aircraft, after 1 week, it came from Turkey. It was ferried from Turkey to Peshawar, and then it flew from Peshawar, as the record goes. And it was shot down because USSR, they were expecting it. So all said and done, we provided them a very vital listening post or a base, Bada Bear base.
In 1960, when US conducted a failed U-2 spy mission from Peshawar Air Base, it nearly initiated an attack by the USSR on Pakistan. In response to all these maiden favors, US did not extend a helping hand to Pakistan in 1965 and 1971 wars. Moreover, she even sanctioned Pakistan with economic and military embargoes. Interestingly, these embargoes didn't last long. US kept on considering Pakistan as an important ally during Cold War.
After the 1962 Sino-Indian conflict, the few benefits that Pakistan was getting, even in terms of weapon systems, finished. Because as you know, in the 1965 war, spare parts were frozen for Pakistan. They froze them for India, but India was not dependent on US weapon system.
It was a different world altogether, I want to tell you. It's very difficult for young people to even understand what the state of the game was in those days. Pakistan desperately needed economic assistance and military arms. It was knocking on all doors. There was no response. And faced with a menacing India that had started off immediately after the establishment of Pakistan with stopping the waters coming into Pakistan, our share, with not giving us what was due to us as the settlement party of the establishment of India and Pakistan, and as I stated, very threatening statements coming from Delhi.
After 1962, a lot more economic and military aid went to India from the US, even though India was in the non-aligned movement, was allied with the Soviet Union. Then came to Pakistan, even though we were members of CENTO and CETO.
That these CETO and CENTO, they are not the agreements which can actually help us against the Indians. So we actually came out of those alliances because they were not of value and worth for us.
The people we are fighting today, we funded. We stopped dealing with the Pakistani military. The people we are fighting today, we funded. We stopped dealing with the Pakistani military.
In early 70s, Pakistan's brotherly relationship with China worked as Pakistan brought Beijing and Washington closer by negotiating President Nixon's visit to China.
When we brought China and America to a close, and the first diplomatic relations were established with them, I think we played a key role, and we were a very important country in the camp of United States of America.
After Nixon, the embargoes were tightened on Pakistan by the US. Then came the Soviets' invasion of Afghanistan, which brought US to Pakistan once again.
Now when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, this was the 27th of December 1979. I happened to be working in Moscow. I was the political counselor there. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, We did, I think. I could be wrong. I was not in headquarters. I was not occupying a senior position. But there was a possibility that Pakistan need not have become the standard bearer of the challenge to Soviet presence in Afghanistan.
Our leaders who made the decision to go and keep the alliance with the US going, including General Ziaul Haq, who plunged the country into a war with Afghanistan which we didn't need, which was not in our interests. The relationship with the US has always been detrimental for Pakistan.
Of course, there are those who believe that President Ziaul Haq, whose government was extremely unpopular at home, was isolated abroad. The president felt, and his advisors felt, that opposition to the Soviet presence in Afghanistan and joining the American-led campaign against the Soviets would bring it kudos, would bring it great advantage.
If we had, when the Soviets came into Afghanistan, we should have spoken to the socialist government that was formed in Afghanistan and sorted out our border issues rather than fighting an American war.
Which it did, incidentally. And General Ziaul Haq, who was isolated and ostracized, overnight became a darling of the West. Lots of money came in, lots of equipment came in, and Pakistan provided not merely refuge to 3.5 million Afghan refugees, but it also became the staging ground for the anti-Soviet and anti-Kabul elements to train, to be equipped, and to be launched into Afghanistan.
Even if we had cooperated with them, the cooperation would have been on more balanced terms, on quid pro quos, not a one-sided relationship where we were giving and they were taking.
This created a serious problem with the Soviets, and the Soviets went on pleading with us that their presence in Afghanistan was not directed against Pakistan. But General Ziaul Haq believed, rightly or wrongly, I do not know, that the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan was not aimed at merely staying in Afghanistan, but that their ambitions was to move into Pakistan and eventually then control the warm waters of the Arabian Sea. This was the belief, this was the rationale. But more importantly, the government of Ziaul Haq was consolidated, it became very strong, and a leader who was isolated and ostracized was accepted, in fact welcomed in all the Western capitals, especially Washington, London, Paris, Bonn, or the rest of the world.
Sir, that you and I have a rendezvous with destiny. I thank you.
ISI-CIA co-op created Mujahideen to stop USSR's further advancement in the region. ISI and CIA jointly assisted Mujahideen to bring USSR to its collapse. And US gets out of the region once again, chest thumping after Trump in the USSR.
So we always wanted the USSR to move out of Afghanistan, and let's have a neutral, if friendly, good, if not friendly, at least a neutral government in Afghanistan, and we wanted to see Afghanistan very stable.
And what was Pakistan's bounty? Well, more sanctions and an element of extremism which was orchestrated by the CIA to achieve their own goals in the region.
Around 5 million refugees, they moved here, and about 1 million plus they went to Iran. At that time, USA definitely wanted to see USSR moving out of Afghanistan, and we also never liked it, because we feared at that time that if Russia manages to establish itself in Afghanistan and Afghanistan is stable, then all kinds of mischiefs could be created in Pakistan, in Balochistan, in KPK area. The Durand Line issue can be, it can come up once again.
It was more of a statement, gentlemen, we don't need you anymore.
I think there cannot be any more person more authentic than Hillary Clinton when she says that we have a history of moving in and out of Pakistan.
We also have a history of kind of moving in and out of Pakistan. I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia. And we went to work. And it was President Reagan, in partnership with the Congress, led by Democrats, who said, you know what, sounds like a pretty good idea. Let's deal with the ISI and the Pakistani military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen. And let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam so that we can go beat the Soviet Union. And guess what? They retreated. They lost billions of dollars, and it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there's a very strong argument, which is, wasn't a bad investment to end the Soviet Union, but let's be careful what we sow because we will harvest. So we then left Pakistan. We said, okay, fine, you deal with the stingers that we've left all over your country. You deal with the mines that are along the border. And by the way, we don't want to have anything to do with you. In fact, we're sanctioning you.
Unfortunately, once they moved out, they abandoned them, and then she is on record having said it. We left Pakistan, and we left Pakistan military and ISI, and we told them to deal with the stingers and mines left all over, and we looked the other way, and we went away.
In mid-90s, Benazir Bhutto requested for lifting embargoes, but nothing healed the sick relationship. US even refused to give F-16s to Pakistan to appease India. In 1998, then PM Sharif conducted nuclear tests in Balochistan in retaliation to similar tests by India. US sanctioned Pakistan further in response. Post 9/11 attack, Pak-US relations saw a new dimension, and Pakistan became one of the most important strategic allies in America's war on terror. Initially, Pakistan did try to negotiate a deal with Taliban and Al-Qaeda to hand over bin Laden to the US authorities, which was failed. And later on, Pakistan ended up giving its air bases to the US to attack on Afghanistan.
No, Americans wanted to go for that. They wanted Osama bin Laden to be handed over to them for trial. But then Mullah Omar resisted, and he said, I'll consult my shura. And after consulting his shura, because few delegations went from ISI and they went to meet him, and even Kingdom of Saudi Arabia tried to play a role and convince Mullah Omar to hand over Osama bin Laden. But then Mullah Omar and his shura, they decided against it. This was one, it is against the tradition of Pakhtunwali, the friendship. And then they said, he has been our friend and ally in liberating Afghanistan from the USSR. So how can we hand over this person? But if they were convinced that he is not involved in 9/11.
Interestingly, years after, former President Pervez Musharraf confessed in his book that Pakistan was left with no choice but to go with US. Well, why? Because US had threatened Pakistan of bombing it into Stone Age.
The people we are fighting today, we funded. We stopped dealing with the Pakistani military. The people we are fighting today, we funded. We stopped dealing with the Pakistani military.
President Bush declared Pakistan as a non-NATO ally and granted it authority to purchase advanced military equipment.
We have done the same post 9/11. We have again been fighting the American war, and we have suffered as a consequence, and we have not got the benefits of going with the US.
With hindsight, we say, giving them bases by the President Musharraf could have been avoided.
General Musharraf's close colleagues who were his associates at that time, they have pointed, including incidentally colleagues in uniform have pointed out, that General Musharraf should not have agreed to become a partner in the post 9/11.
I think a lot would have been different. One, we would not have accepted terms and conditions without discussing them. There would have been a parliament where discussions would have taken place.
Afghanistan is a landlocked country, and if they were trying to move in with the forces and they moved in with the Northern Alliance and toppled the government of Mullah Omar, because at that time we have recognized the government of Mullah Omar and we had developed established diplomatic relation with Mullah Omar government.
Without having first ensured Pakistan's interests. The fact that he did so cannot but remind you of the great similarity between his position and the position of his regime with that of General Zia and General Zia's regime in post-December 1979 situation.
That support probably could have been limited and some lines could have been drawn instead of giving them a blank check as they had.
Here again, General Musharraf's regime was isolated. The Western democracies were coming down heavily, demanding a restoration of the democratic dispensation. The European Union had passed very severe sanctions. Commonwealth had come out with strong denunciations. Americans too had expressed their unhappiness. And then out of the blue, 9/11 takes place, and we readily agree to the demands of the United States.
In democracies, the will of the people is ascertained through parliament. And we would have had a much different relationship with the US. Even if we had cooperated with them, the cooperation would have been on more balanced terms, on quid pro quos, not a one-sided relationship where we were giving and they were taking.
Since 2004, US repeatedly drone-attacked Pakistani territory, arguing that these attacks are focused on Taliban's safe havens in border areas. These attacks fueled the extremism within Pakistan, resulting into a new wave of terrorism in Pakistan that still persists. Drones came with a large number of Pakistani civilians' death.
If you look at the killings, most of the killings by drones have been of civilians, whether it was a marriage party, whether it was a jirga, peace jirga being organized. So if they're that precise and if the intelligence was that good, then why have the majority of the victims been civilians?
The terrorists, as they call them, or the mujahideen who are being targeted, they don't travel alone. When they were traveling in a vehicle and a particular person was targeted, along with them there was a collateral damage. And that collateral damage, the innocent people died, or the family members died where he was hiding, or those terrorists were staying.
But the issue is not whether they're precise or not. The issue is it is illegal. And if something is illegal, then there are no degrees. If you have X amount of illegality involved in an action, you'll forgive it. No. We're a sovereign country. They're illegal. They're against international law, including international humanitarian law. Which is why, if you notice, the anti-US drone movement is not limited to Pakistan or to PTI. It has been global. People all over the world have been protesting about what the US is doing with their drone attacks.
And people thought they are being unfair, they are being killed, the innocent people are being killed, the various mosques were attacked, various other places, and that's why Pakistan government had been always protesting.
Moreover, US continuously blamed Pakistan of helping Taliban. This mutual trust between Islamabad and Washington shook further in 2008 when a US airstrike martyred 11 FC soldiers of Pakistan that saw a fierce reaction from Pakistan.
But this Salala is entirely a different incident, and I think it was very unfair on their part. The people, they raised the flag also, and they tried to tell them that they gave the signals, but yet Americans attacked that Salala post, taking it as a Mujahideen post, or willfully defying it and targeting the soldiers.
But in 2009, US passed carry-logo bill that entailed the approval of granting $7.5 billion of non-military aid only if certain demands were accepted. It was more like nothing comes free statement to a country that was shadowed by clouds of terror harvested by America's war on terror. The relationship further saw bumps when a CIA agent, Raymond Davis, killed 2 civilians in Lahore.
There were a next number of specialists who came, who were given visas by Hussain Haqqani, and over 680 of them were deported from Pakistan. They were moved out of it, and they had occupied various houses. They were operating all over in the country. Mostly the name was given to them, the black waters or special agents. So they were also asked to leave the country.
Furthermore, bin Laden was killed in Abbottabad, Pakistan by US Navy SEALs in 2011. And to secure his second term in the presidential office, Barack Obama claimed that it was conducted by the US without informing Pakistani authorities because of the trust deficit, whereas ISI claimed that Pakistan assisted the operation.
I have an experience of serving in ISI for over 3.5 years. I think it's not such a naive organization that they would have him and they'll put him in a place and keep him there for years and years altogether. You don't keep the most sought after person by the most advanced country, by the most powerful state is hunting for him, and you make him a sitting duck in a particular house for more than 5 years. It wasn't the only safe house if he was to be kept there, and they could have kept him at a much safer place if they had to.
Pak-US relations further plummeted when 24 Pakistani soldiers lost their lives in a US airstrike. Pakistan ordered US Army to evacuate Salala Air Base, which was being used by US to launch attacks in Afghanistan. Furthermore, Islamabad also halted NATO supplies to Afghanistan.
But that reaction, that when it came from Pakistan, government of Pakistan, and particularly at that time, the People's Party government and General Kiani, it was very well measured, and I think we stopped their logistics support for over 8 months. We blocked their logistics support. Then we asked them to vacate the 3 bases that they had been given, including Shamsi. And at that time, Pakistan Army's a unit was moved. It surrounded Shamsi base and told them to leave within X number of days. Probably a month was given to them that vacate it, otherwise we'll move in. And they had to vacate. They tried to move around, wriggle out of it. They approached the UAE government, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but then nothing was accepted and they were asked to leave. So all the 3 bases, Pasni, Gwadar and Shamsi base, they had to vacate and leave.
For the next episode, as we'll further look into the current status of Pak-US relations, especially what is do more mantra, and Trump being in the Oval Office, how could he influence CPAC, Kashmir dispute and Indian involvement in terrorism in Pakistan. Moreover, how impressive Foreign Minister Khwaja Asif has been so far.
The people we are fighting today, we funded. We stopped dealing with the Pakistani military